Member of Parliament Władysław T Bartoszewski is with us today. He is a historian, academic lecturer, business manager, and most recently a politician. He was elected to the Polish Parliament in 2019, and he's also a member of Polish-Israeli Parliamentary Group. I would like to welcome our guest, and I hope that we can start a really interesting call. Mr. Bartoszewski, welcome.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I know that it's quite a large and important group listening. I would like to begin by saying that you mentioned that the Parliament, there is a Polish-Israeli group. It's the largest group of all groups in Parliament. It has, if I recall correctly, 136 members out of 460 MPs. So the groups are usually like 30, 40, 50 strong. To have almost 140 is quite unprecedented for all political parties. I think almost all political parties, maybe with one exception. First of all, I think I'd like to say very few words and be more than happy to answer questions, because it is a big topic and I don't quite know what would you be particularly interested in. I would call the topic Poland-Israel a bittersweet friendship. Actually, it is a friendship. It's our relationship with the Jewish people and the Israelis in particular resemble more that of a family relationship, which is sometimes extremely good and sometimes people get on their nerves and sometimes they're quarrelsome, sometimes there are some problems, and if there are problems, they are felt much more strongly by the members because we are too close to each other. It's very easy to be tolerant of complete strangers because nobody cares. If you care about somebody and they do something you don't like, you get hurt and you react. And this has been probably the nature of our relationship. The last, one has to remember that there were no particular relationship between Israel and Poland after the Six-Day War. When the Israelis, the Polish Jews were forced to leave the country, and many thousands left, some for Israel, but also for Scandinavia, for England, for France, and for the United States. And the relationship was impossible. Normal relationship was impossible thanks to the communist government. In 1990, this relationship was revived, and in fact, I had the pleasure to be the guest of honor on the 25th anniversary of this relationship. Polish-Israeli diplomatic links being revived, was organized by the Israeli embassy in Warsaw, and strangely enough, the daughter of the last ambassador to Warsaw before in 1967 was there in the audience. And even more strangely, because the Polish government at that stage decided not to give any diplomatic help to the Israeli diplomats leaving, which is against the normal diplomatic protocol, the ambassador and his wife were left to their own devices, and they had to carry their own luggage, a number of suitcases they had to carry. And a Polish couple, helped them to get onto the airport and towards the plane. And that couple was my father and my mother. And so it was quite and the daughter remembered that. She didn't know who it was, but she remembered the Polish couple who carried their suitcases. It was quite a moving moment. Anyway, back to the point. After 1990, there were very substantial, there was an explosion of Polish-Israeli contacts in all possible spheres of life. Firstly, it was in political contacts with frequent visits and meetings at the state level, including at the level of heads of state. I mean, Polish president went to Israel, of course, Polish prime ministers a number of times. Secondly, and I can talk about it later, secondly, it was very strong economic involvement, where Israelis are one of the biggest investors in the Polish economy, especially some in high tech, some in startups, but also in real estate. They and the Spaniards are the biggest investors in real estate in Poland. Thirdly, of course, there was an explosion of tourism, but people going to Israel, from Poland to Israel, and lots of Israelis coming before the pandemic to Poland, believe it or not, just to do shopping. There was quite a bizarre development, but there were masses of young Israelis coming to shop in one of the numerous shopping malls in the country. There were very many cultural ties and theaters, literary and music and so on. But something which, of course, is very little talked about for very good reason, and something which was probably the key aspect of Polish-Israeli relationship in the last 25 years, were contacts on the military and especially on the security. This is not something which I'm going to dwell into, but the relationship in that sector were and remain excellent. And this is very strong, if not seen. It's a little bit like between the UK and Israel. The relationship between the UK government and the Israeli government differ and vary from time to time. There are sometimes serious problems, but what never was changed in the close security cooperation. And this is a model which we had developed with Israel, and to, I would say, mutual benefit. That's enough said on that subject. Of course, there are some sensitive issues, and you have to move with certain understanding. When I would recall a visit of the late President Lech Kaczynski as a head of state to Israel. The prime minister was Yitzhak Shamir. And Yitzhak Shamir, President Kaczynski came and first slightly surprised the Israeli hosts because he twice said in public as a head of state, visiting head of state, that the capital of the state of Israel is Jerusalem. That caused quite a stir in the foreign affairs ministry, which I believe our then ambassador is on this call and she can confirm it, because that was not what was expected. Then he appeared in the Knesset, which was criticized by the some Israeli politicians because they thought it was not appropriate, and he said sorry, that he's sorry for what happened to the Jews in Poland, and he talked about the Poles who didn't always behave as they should, and he was very kind of frank. And Yitzhak Shamir, who was not uncritical of the Poles, as we all know, put down his speech. He didn't read his speech, and he just talked about his remembrance of Poland and the fact that Poland produced Jabotinsky, and that Piłsudski was a model for Jabotinsky. There was a hero, and the atmosphere was completely changed. And this is what I alluded at the beginning. This is like a family, and it's some good things happen and some very bad things happen sometimes. But this was Lech Kaczynski had a good feeling how to deal with the Jewish people. He was, I would actually refer to him as a fellow Semite. He was quite strong in his support. Now, what happened? I'll get to the worst things. The worst thing that happened in the last years was the law produced by the current government of Law and Justice, the so-called IPN, the Institute of National Remembrance Law, which suggested in a very clumsy fashion that not only people who refer to the death camps on the Polish soil should be penalized. The Polish death camps, as is often referred to in the media, which irritates Poles intensely. And for the record, I'm sure you are aware, but I don't think any journalist is aware, that the most infamous death camp of that of Auschwitz-Birkenau was actually not on Polish soil, because that part of Poland was incorporated into the Reich. So it was in the Third Reich, but that's not neither here nor there. So apart from this criticism, which is could be understandable, the law suggested that all the research on the Holocaust, on the Shoah, which shows that the Poles were in any way and form guilty of participation or helping, some individuals were helping the Germans killing Jews, should be penalized. You know, that was, of course, I called it in Polish Parliament the worst from the Polish image point of view, the worst law passed in the Polish Parliament in the last 30 years. It was mad, it was insane, it was wrong, and caused horrendous problems. I got involved in fighting this straight at the beginning. The first day the law was signed by President Duda, I went to the Israeli embassy and I had a meeting with the ambassador and the deputy ambassador, and I asked if there was anything I could do to help. And to my complete surprise, I couldn't believe what I heard. They were unable to discuss this issue with the man who runs Poland because he wouldn't pick up the phone. No, that is not the prime minister, by the way, or the president. So I said, okay, I will use back channels to pass on the message that this is going to harm Poland internationally in a horrible way, and it's going to be very, very detrimental to our position in the world. The message was delivered, but was disbelieved. The message was not believed, and the message was delivered by somebody who was a trusty a person who was trusted by the recipient of the message. And of course, what I said proved to be correct, and it was a source of a horrible breakdown in relationship, not only with the State of Israel, but also with the United States of America. And that forced the government in Poland to reconsider. And thanks to the actions of Prime Minister Netanyahu, I will not get into domestic policies of Israel, because I know that some people like the prime ministers, some people don't like the prime ministers. It's not for me as a foreigner to make any comments. But the fact is that Prime Minister Netanyahu initiated an action trying to recover the situation. And thanks to certain negotiations which took place, I know some of the people who, at least one of the two Israelis who participated, who was a very wise person. This was changed. But the fact is that until the new government was sworn in, and when the new foreign minister in Israel arrived, and the new ambassador of Israel arrived to Poland, we were in a period of wasted 2 years. Now things are looking up, and it's quite obvious that we've got a restart in the offing, and we already started quietly also in the Polish Parliament to support some of the Israeli initiatives, including the one you mentioned at the opening, and things will move in the right direction. There is as I said, there is a huge number of Polish members of parliament who are interested in a relationship with Israel, and God willing, the coronavirus would stop, and we will start flying to Israel, and Israeli Knesset members will start flying here, and more normal connections will revive. And I think this is maybe all I should say now, and because I'm not quite sure what people want to hear, and will answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for this very brief and very deep 30 years of history. I just wanted to go back for a second to the very early past, in case our speakers might not know this, but I believe this is very interesting. Poland was one of the first few countries who recognized independent Israel. Poland recognized Israel on May 19th, 1948. Also, it was in Warsaw, Poland, where the first Israeli embassy opened in September 1948, when Israel was still in the middle of the war. That was the first embassy, and as you mentioned, we had a really big, difficult moment in the 1967 after the Six-Day War, when the relations were broken. But now we're back, and as you mentioned, we are looking forward with a lot of optimism. The foreign minister spoke for the first time in 2 years, 2 weeks ago, and they officially agreed to pursue the collaboration in many different fields. And they also agreed to meet as soon as situation allows. And I wanted to ask you, what do you, as a member of the Polish-Israeli Parliamentary Group, what would you personally like to pursue? Where do you see the best fields of cooperation with Israel? Having said that, we lost 2 years, sadly.
We lost 2 years. I mean, first of all, one has to also remember that Poland was quietly but efficiently supporting the Israeli position in the EU. We were always talking to the Israeli government and trying to help while voting in the 28, as one of the 28 members of the EU, with Israel, or blocking various attempts to impose various sanctions or restrictions on the state of Israel. So that was something which should continue. But it was, of course, impossible once there was no talk for 2 years. But now this is one of the subjects which should continue. It's a given. There are sometimes, there's sometimes these things which are not known or official at the time, which bring countries together, are successful. In 1990, my father was a Polish ambassador to Vienna, and he organized, together with his colleague, the Israeli ambassador to the OECD in Vienna, not the Israeli ambassador to Austria. He organized a huge transfer of Russian Jews from Moscow to Tel Aviv. That was done on a condition that they cannot fly directly. And Polish planes took them from Moscow to Vienna, and Israeli took them from Vienna to Tel Aviv. And that was, at the time, it was about 100,000 Jews moved that way. It was at the time a secret operation, but now, of course, it's known. And this is one of the kind of cooperations which not everybody has to know about, but which is efficiently increase the level of friendship and confidence, because you do things like that together, and you have, you start to know each other and trust each other better. There's absolutely no question that we have to be the defenders of Israel within the EU. You mentioned anti-Semitism in Poland. Yes, there is anti-Semitism in Poland, like in every other country. But Poland, I'm not sure what are the current situation, but until relatively recently, at least until 2018, Poland was the only country where the Israeli ambassador could walk, not during the week, because that's different, but at weekends could walk around or drive around Poland without a bodyguard. That is not allowed in France or in England or in Germany or in Belgium or in the Netherlands or anywhere else in the EU. Poland was the only country which the Israeli security thought is safe enough for the ambassador to move around without a bodyguard. But it shows the attitude. We don't have to guard synagogues. We don't have to, not that we have that many, unfortunately, but we don't have to gather, because the attitude is not hostile. So I would definitely work on the political side, because we have to recreate the bonds which were there. The relationship with the Prime Minister Netanyahu, because most Poles didn't know any other Israeli Prime Minister, he's been there for so long, was always excellent. Sometimes you have to sometimes translate to your own people what the other people mean and why do they say various things. So when a prime minister would say something which the Poles didn't like, I would go and say, listen, he is a great friend of Poland. He has his own, during the election campaign, he has to say things to appeal to various people who may like you less, but that's not the point. The point is that he is our friend and we should stick to it. And there were, of course, Israelis who were extremely knowledgeable about these matters, and I very strongly regret that Professor Moshe Arens passed away, because he was one of these people who had a very good grasp of what is happening here and how to play it, and he was much respected. I liked him very much personally, and I miss people who with that kind of knowledge and insight. And so this is one of the things which I was interested in, or for a while I was interested in, and I was dealing with it's for instance, on the security side, I would like to strengthen our relationship with General Ben Israel, who is the head of cybersecurity for the State of Israel, because he's got a very clever approach. I spoke to him a number of times, and I would like to and I know some of his people who used to come here regularly, and I would like to use their wisdom and experience to help us here as well, and strengthen the ties in that sphere. I'd like to see more academic exchanges. I absolutely, totally condemn and disagree with any attempts of Western academics or European academics to try to ban Israelis or try to boycott Israeli academics and academic science. I am 100% against it, and I will do everything possible to fight it. And I would like to encourage the academic exchanges also to show that we are of a different frame of mind than some of our colleagues in the European Union. And the rest, I mean, the rest you just have to let go. That is, if you create the right conditions, people would come. I very much like to get more young people coming to, young Israelis coming to Poland, and young Poles going to Israel, because when they see each other as perfectly normal, they develop their own friendships and they develop their own relations, and you cannot steer it from the top. You just have to facilitate it, maybe. But I, of course, will concentrate on the political and security aspect of it. And I think lots of my colleagues in Parliament understand that that's highly important.
Thank you. We have several questions from our audience. Let me start before we move to the questions. I wanted to recognize we have many distinguished guests joining us today. I will not be able to welcome you all personally, but I just want to mention that we're talking about Polish-Israeli history, but people who made this history and who are still making this history are here with us. We have Chief Rabbi of Poland, Michael Szudrich, that I would like to welcome very warmly. We have Phyllis Heidemann, the president of International March of the Living. Amazing project that started before reestablishing the Polish-Israeli formal diplomatic relations in 1988. We have former ambassadors of Israel in Poland and of Poland in Israel. We also have former diplomats. So thank you for being with us. And again, sorry, I cannot welcome all of you personally. And let's move to our questions. We have a question from another great friend of ours who did so much who contributed so much for Polish-Jewish dialogue, recognizing Poles who rescued Jewish heritage, Michael Trayson. He's now in Chicago. Michael, would you like to ask your question personally?
I'll thank you for that introduction. I don't think there's any relationship that is more unique than that between Israel and Poland. I don't think the Jewish diaspora has a different relationship with any other of the countries that we've lived in. But I can recall going all the way back to the early 1990s when I'd get into a taxi and I'd say that I wanted to go to Krzywickiego, and the driver would acknowledge by saying, "Oh, you want to go to the Jewish embassy?" Or when people would say to me, "I saw your prime minister on television, and I'd say, well, I'm an American Jew. And they say, well, you know what we mean. So my question has to do with the fact that there appears to be a large part of the population of Poland that I've encountered who don't necessarily distinguish between identity as an Israeli and as a Jew, that they view Israel as representing all of the Jewish people and vice versa. Member of Parliament Bartoszewski, can you comment on that, please?
Well, I think this is true. I mean, it's you know, the fact is that the state of Israel. I mean, not everybody made Aliyah, but the state of Israel does represent all the Jews. This is a state which was created not only because of Herzl wanted to escape Europe and have a safe haven, but of course accelerated after the Shoah. But it's a safe haven for all Jews, and every Jew, I think, feels that if should something happen horrible in some other country, the only place to go is the state of Israel. So it's state of Israel for goyim like me represents, in a sense, the Israelis and the diaspora. I mean, who does represent the diaspora? You know, I know when I've been in touch with large, say, American Jewish organizations, but for me, I mean, it may not be legally correct. And I understand one can feel offended being an American Jew or the French Jew or whatever. But yes, this is a common perception. The state of Israel represents all the Jews in the world, and we have a special relationship for historical reasons. I remember, I believe my friend, Professor Antony Polonsky may be on the call, and we organized a few years ago, a conference was organized in a museum of the history of Polish Jews, Polin, which is an excellent museum, about the 1,000 years of Jewish history in Poland. Because yes, the Jews lived in Poland for 1,000 years. And the conference took 4 days. And there was a huge affair. Everybody came from everywhere. And at the end of the conference, the conclusion was that Warsaw, in particular, was the Jewish capital of the world until 1939. Sadly, that ceased to exist. But the links are there, and the Poles. You mentioned 67, and the government wanted successfully. Expelled thousands of Jews, but the sympathy of the Poles in the Six-Day War was firmly on the state of the Israelis, which infuriated the communist government even more. So yeah, I mean, for us, Israel is a very special place, and I think that's why maybe people say, well, okay, you may come from the States, but at the end, it's your prime minister. Yes, and most prime ministers of Israel were actually quite closely linked to Poland. If I remember correctly, only 3 since 48 didn't have Polish roots.
I remember the days when they said, Israel has a Polish prime minister, why doesn't Poland?
Well, it's I remember that Shimon Peres was joking with my father, who was at the time a foreign minister of Poland, that Israel has 2 foreign ministers because my father was a non-citizen of the state of Israel. So Peres was joking that we have two foreign ministers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I also wanted to mention that I did some research, and it looks like since 1990, all Israeli presidents visited Poland, and all Polish presidents went to Israel. Most of the prime ministers also visited their counterparts, which is pretty unique. Please correct me if I'm wrong. We have Israeli diplomats here. We have David. I don't think that happens with every country that Israel has diplomatic relations. Am I right?
No, it doesn't. I mean, if I may say something, this cooperation was much closer because every 2 years the Prime Minister of Israel would go to Jerusalem with a number of ministers, and alternate years, the Prime Minister Netanyahu would bring 8-9 ministers and come to Poland for 2 days. And for 2 days, they locked themselves in the Prime Minister's chancellery, and these 8 or 9 ministers discuss all the issues they had to discuss, and then they flew back. And that was done at the insistence of Prime Minister Netanyahu. He wanted that, and he got it. And there was this. It was not lately, but until 2018, it was every year. There were. I mean, there were meetings like that. I mean, there were working meetings. They didn't show themselves much. And Prime Minister Netanyahu had a absolutely crazy idea one day to bring the entire Knesset, to have a session of the Knesset in Krakow. I talked to the head of security in Poland, who said, this is an absolutely crazy thing, because how we can ensure security of all 120 members of the Knesset in a very small medieval town like Krakow, where everything is very close. And he says, imagine if there is an attack and some Knesset members are killed in Poland. I will kill myself. I mean, you cannot allow that to happen. Anyway, Prime Minister insisted, and he brought a third of the Knesset.
Actually, there were 61, actually.
Yeah, I think maybe even half. Yeah, even half. It was quite an amazing, but it's done at his insistence. He, of course, his father was born in Poland too before he went to United States.
That's correct. And Prime Minister Netanyahu visited Poland on so many occasions. Let's move to our next question. Gerald Platt, would you like to ask a question yourself, or should I read your question to our speaker? Okay, so I'll just go with the question. Poland is the most prominent member of the Visegrad Group, and their collective support of Israel is nothing less than admirable. There has been some chatter that the Czech Republic was toying with the idea of moving its embassy to Jerusalem. Does this move need the consent of the members of the group? And when will Poland also begin flying trial balloon to determine if the embassy should move to Jerusalem as well?
I don't think any EU country will move unilaterally an embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. There are various matters discussed, but I'm not in a position to share it with you. But I can tell you that things are moving in a good direction. But this is not for a public call.
Absolutely. Well, that's enough for us to know. Piotr Puchta, head of the Foundation of Preservation of Jewish Heritage, had a question. Piotr, would you like to ask the question to our speaker?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like, first of all, to address the issue of preservation of Jewish heritage in Poland. Knowing that the Interparliamentary Group Poland-Israel is involved in many issues, I would like to use this opportunity to ask Mr. Bartoszewski if the preservation of Jewish heritage in Poland could be one of the issues that you would put on the agenda of the group.
So anything else new?
Nothing else new. I've asked for a slow start here.
Good.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So again, if this issue of preservation of Jewish heritage in Poland could be put on the agenda of the group in the Polish Parliament that is very much interested in moving forward the relations between Poland and Israel.
This is a wider issue. That doesn't concern only Israel. This concerns, of course, the diaspora, but it also concerns the Poles. You cannot forget the huge Jewish presence in Poland before the war, and well, the largest in Europe, and the second largest in the world after the United States. and one has a duty to take care of these monuments. Strangely enough, for very many decades, one of the most horrible but important monuments of Jewish, not so much life but death in Poland, Auschwitz-Birkenau, was neglected. And it took my father to start a foundation, Auschwitz Foundation, to get the funds to keep this camp from crumbling down. Because of course some art historians say, well, you should not, restore historical monuments, let them, crumble. But the fact is that we have to keep this camp, which after all was a pre-World War I Austrian barracks, so they were not meant to last. And now the future of these buildings to commemorate this horrible event would be preserved. And this is a duty also to preserve small cemeteries, to preserve some of the existing synagogues, which don't work as synagogues anymore, largely, or the mikvahs or whatever. There are such buildings, and of course the cemeteries, the matzevas have to be restored as well. And I have absolutely no problem discussing that on the Polish parliamentary group, that we have to also the government in the past contributed financially to, for instance, renovating the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw, which is very important, and other things. But this is something which has to be done. Yes, I have no question about it. Yes, if you don't, if you forget your past, you have no future. I mean, you have to, and the Jewish life here was extremely important for the Polish state for hundreds of years, and it's our duty to help. And there are plenty of NGOs who are interested in it and working, and lots of Poles spontaneously try to help. And of course, but the government, the parliament should certainly make sure that there are sufficient funds, and the policy is there's official policy of preservation.
Thank you. I really appreciate what you are saying right now. If I could use a couple of more minutes of your time and just put forward something that from my perspective is very important. I truly believe that we are right now witnessing some kind of window of opportunity after the two foreign ministers spoke to each other, and they declared openness and readiness to cooperate in various fields. I believe that ELNET has a very important role to play right now, meaning to fill this declaration of the two foreign ministers with substance. This is something that I would like to put on the table of our discussion right now. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if I have to answer. Yes, of course, organizations such as ELNET have a very big role to play, because the general declarations of goodwill are one thing, and then something has to be concrete, has to be done, and it's not necessarily the politicians who know what is the best thing to do, because they look at it from a slightly different perspective, and they are not so good on detail sometimes.
Thank you very much. We have one more question from Gerald regarding the Poland's perspective on assumption of sovereignty over Jordan Valley. I know this topic is not really very deeply discussed in Polish media right now, but is it discussed in the parliament? Do you have any idea what will be Poland's response if the Israeli government will move with the decision of applying Israeli law over the Jordan Valley?
This is it hasn't been discussed in parliament. There has been no decision yet in Israel. Obviously, nothing was implemented. There was talk about this. Poland would probably together with other EU countries, suggests that it's better if these decisions are done on a bilateral basis and not unilateral basis, because I'm now talking as a politician. As an academic, I will have maybe different views, knowing the past since 1948 in this area. But it's generally speaking, from the political point of view, unilateral actions are not conducive to long-term stability. It's given that Israel has now a very good relationship with a number of Arab states, including even Saudi Arabia, which was certainly not a friend over many decades. One has to proceed with caution in such matters, and securing the at least acquiescence. It's fairly important because otherwise it creates a very bad precedent, and you cannot, from the point of view of a politician in the EU, if you start allowing changing the borders unilaterally without agreements, it has some very bad precedents, and we really wouldn't like to see that. So it's a matter of I understand it's very difficult to make a deal with people who do not see any reason to make a deal. And I know the history of all the negotiations with the Palestinians, with the PLO and the Palestinian Authority, and so on. I'm fully aware of that, and I'm fully aware that they didn't take lots of chances they were given. But it's a tricky situation, and I think even the President of the United States does not completely accept this suggestion. So it's I would urge some restraint and caution, because I mean, the situation, it's not easy. I mean, it's the truth. It's not easy to solve because it hasn't been solved, but yet. And it's true that the appetite in the state of Israel for two-state solution has faded over the years of waiting for agreement from the other side. I fully accept that. But I think Israel has other more important problems. You mentioned Hezbollah. Well, that is a problem. That is a serious problem. That is the most serious problem Israel has. The 100,000 rockets in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, it's a really big issue. So I would concentrate on rather trying to fence that in than to something else. But I'm not an advisor to the Prime Minister of Israel, so and I'm not an Israeli citizen, so they will do whatever they like. But it's I mean, for me, the existential threat to Israel lies in the north and not on the West Bank. So I would probably concentrate on that.
Thank you. Esther Candle raised her hand. Esther, you had a question to our speaker. Can you please unmute yourself? Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce your name in Polish, but I want to thank you. First of all, as a daughter of a survivor of Auschwitz, I'm deeply moved by your story, and I'm sorry I came late to the meeting. I'm just hearing now about your father. Perhaps you said earlier in the meeting, can I ask what drove your father? And then I assume that trickled down to you. That's question number one. Number two, I followed the whole law of the land with Poland and how offended they were. I assume just because of your personal experience with your father and you understood it. We over here personally, and Israel and survivors, can you elaborate more about that law and how you were able to explain why it was so offensive? How did you get in more detail that shelved or canceled? How did you appeal to the Polish, which we found unbelievably offensive? You said technically Auschwitz was not on Polish territory land, but it was. But I mean, I don't want to argue with it, but it was. Once upon a time it was. You could argue that they fought back, but did Poland actually fight for that land? But in any event, if you could elaborate more on that law, it was unbelievably shocking to all of us, and how you were able to really argue the point, considering your background. And thank you again for being such a friend to Israel. It's unbelievable, really. Thank you so much.
I'm not sure what exactly you meant by what drove my father. There were two things which drove my father in the war after he was released from Auschwitz. Is that first that he had to bear witness and document all the Nazi German crimes, and because he started collecting all kinds of leaflets, posters, documents related to the Nazi occupation in Poland. And about the second thing, you might refer to the fact that he was helping Jews during the war, and that has to do with his upbringing. And you may be surprised to hear that it's to do with two main factors. I mean, first, in my family, my grandparents were very liberal and had plenty of Jewish friends. So he was familiar with Jews coming to home and so on. I mean, they were assimilated Jews. I mean, they were quite, but he also lived for some years on the border of the Jewish district. So he met the Hasidic Jews and so on. So anyway, so there was certain familiarity. But he was educated first at home, but in a junior high and high school, he went to, he was taught by the Jesuits. And you would be surprised that they installed in him a certain set of values, which I would say go back to, say, 10 Commandments, and what is decent and what is not. And the biggest impact he had who started him on helping Jews were two people. One was Father Jan Zieja, who himself is a righteous, and who, when my father went to confession after leaving Auschwitz, he said, "Don't feel sorry for yourself. God saved you to do something good, and you have to help people who are worse off than you are." So my father said, "Well, who is worse off than I am? I just came out of Auschwitz and I'm a post student or whatever." And he said, "Look at people behind the wall, the Jews. You have to help the Jews." And he changed my father's life. And the other person was Zofia Kosak, who started the Council for Aid to Jews. And both of them were highly religious, but highly moral. So I would say this is the best part of religion. When you say, when Zofia Kosak said, "No Polish Christian can stand idly by when the Jews are being murdered. You cannot just be a bystander. You have to act. You cannot call yourself a Christian if you don't help the Jews." Well, that was my father's motivation. He felt it was very religious, actually. And so, as far as the law, I mean, the law was obviously passed to appeal to the extreme right-wing sympathizers in Poland, who would be, so in other words, this was a ploy by the ruling party to get an additional, 2, 3, 4% of voters by appealing to the extreme right. This unfortunate behavior happens in different countries. If you want to increase your electoral popularity, you try to appeal to the kind of lowest common feelings, and this was meant like that. Of course, it backfired horribly because the ruling party didn't understand what it really meant to everybody else, what it meant to the Jews, what it meant to the Israelis, what it meant to the Americans who looked at it as well, and it was completely counterproductive, because I understand the Polish touchiness when the New York Times writes about Polish death camps. It's a laziness of journalists. It were not Polish death camps. They were German death camps on the Polish occupied soil. This is not the same thing. And people get annoyed, rightly so, because you know, if you are in a small town somewhere and run a local gazette, nobody cares. But if you're major, say, American papers, and that used to appear in the New York Times or the Washington Post and so on, and that does get people irritated. But in order to fight with this expression, Polish death camps, you passed a law which basically tries to criminalize any serious research, and it tries to say that Poles, anybody who says that Poles were nothing but angels during the war should be punished. I was asked once on television if Poles should be given all Poles should be given a tree in Yad Vashem as righteous. And I said, the Polish nation does not deserve a tree in Yad Vashem as the nation. The Polish state does, because the Polish, and that was confirmed even an article by Moshe Arens in Haaretz, I think. The Polish government in exile, which was a representative of the Polish state, within 3 months of the foundation of the Council for Aid to Jews, said this is a government organization. We take it under our wings. We pay them money so they can function. And this is part of official government. And the Polish government in exile was the only one who said that something has to be done to help the Jews in Poland. And everybody said, well, we'll do it after the war. That was the President Roosevelt's view when he visited by Jan Karski, and so on. And Moshe Arens was the one who pointed it out in the press in Jerusalem. But the law was obviously absolutely idiotic. And I was talking, and not only I, but plenty of people talking to in the country. Many people shared my views that apart from anything else is hugely counterproductive, because all of a sudden, after the law was passed, the expression Polish death camps were used a million times. So if that was the purpose to stop this expression, it backfired in a spectacular way. And then the government didn't know what to do with it, because first the government doesn't like to retreat, because no government likes to admit to making mistakes. It does look bad. And then I think actually the helping hand to the Polish government came from the Israeli government. So the wiser council prevailed, and the Law and Justice Party decided that actually the damage is substantial enough that it has to be something has to be done. But in reality, a crucial part was that what they the government completely miscalculated is there was a strong American reaction behind the scenes that they will not accept that. And that is something the Polish government does listen to the Americans, like most other governments, actually. And the reaction was quite strong. And there was serious messages, serious messengers who came to Warsaw and delivered the line, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. And the ruling party understood that they made a huge mistake. So there are lots of people were against it. And lots of people try to do something, but at the end, the two key factors were very clever approach by the Israeli government, and in which I've mentioned him a lot, but he did play a part in which Moshe Arens was one of the people behind, and the second is the American reaction, and that's made the change, because the Polish government, especially this government, does not like to ever admit that anything they did might have been not 100% clever. But thankfully we have a completely different situation, and there is a reset now, and I'm very pleased about the new foreign minister of Israel, and I'm very pleased about the new ambassador in Israel that's here. And I think we are going to move forward. We are going to move forward. Of course, everybody remembers what happened in the past, because that's the nature of human memory. But let's say that was a hiccup, bad one. But we managed to turn the corner and don't go there again. So I think now people will be way more careful than they used to be. So I think there was, to be frankly honest, this government is not a master in foreign policy. And the government is the first one since 1990 which did not understand that foreign policy is a continuity of the country's interest abroad, and not a party political tool to get some advantage at home. You do something abroad to please your electorate in the country. This is a very reckless and short-sighted and not intelligent way of doing foreign policy. And I think the lesson has been learned, and I think this will go slightly differently from now on.
Thank you very much. We have one last question from Frederick McDonald. Frederick, would you like to ask your question to our speaker? Yes, go ahead.
What are the big threats right now to the relationship between the two countries?
I think there's always the same thing. There's always somebody who is, for whatever reason, trying to cause trouble. We've got, for instance, extreme nationalist party who criticize straight away some statement made by the new Israeli ambassador in Warsaw. There are some people who are on this kind of populist bent who'd like to use history as a political tool, and it does exist both in Poland and in Israel. I mean, there are people who are not necessarily the men and women of reason, but like to get political advantage by staring, and history, especially such complicated, long and complicated history as our common history, is full of things you can pick up and use. So you could say that Poles were murdering Jews en masse, and Poles would say, oh yes, but all the communists were Jewish, or all the secret police communists were Jewish, and so on. This doesn't get you anywhere. This is why I believe my friend Professor Antony Polonsky is on the call, and this is why we started working together, and that was already in 1984, to create a forum for discussion between Israeli and Jewish scholars all over the world, and Polish scholars and others all over the world. And that's why we've been producing monumental volumes. As you can see that behind me. You can see them behind me, of Pauline, 33 volumes of kind of 500 pages each, where these matters historical are discussed in a proper academic fashion. It's not that we agree on everything, but at least we know where we stand. We discuss historians never agree on anything to do with history, but we basics we all agree on, and we try to educate the people. And the problem is that it's an endless process, because we thought some years ago that we managed to get people more or less understanding the common past, and then it comes a couple of years ago, somebody who is Meshuggah and starts doing it all over again. So it's a hopeless task, but it has to be done. So the danger is that you got somebody who wants to stir trouble, usually for getting some short-term political advantage, and if you let it pass without countering it, it can create a problem. And the best thing to do is to say, no, we don't agree with it. So the best thing to do is, if somebody in Poland says, something completely idiotic and wrong, that we and me and I go and say, no, we completely disagree with this. This is wrong. This is not correct. This is not right. And the same thing I would expect people in Israel or in the Jewish diaspora. And the fact is, it does happen, and it did happen. And there were lots of pronouncements amongst the, for instance, American Jews, American Jewish leaders who said, no, 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 you cannot say that stupid things. And when there was slightly unfortunate expressions by the former foreign minister of Israel, he was immediately criticized by American Jewish leaders as saying, you should not say things like that. And this is a correct response, because then we can contain it. And we will argue, we would argue about lots of things for a long time. I mean, we are very similar. Where there are two Jews, there are three opinions, and we are not different. So, unfortunately, the Knesset was based on the pre-1926 Polish diet, and it works equally well, I would say. Reminds me of my first visit to Jerusalem in 1982, and my host and guide was Gideon Hausner, a very distinguished Israeli lawyer, ex-attorney general who prosecuted Eichmann. And he walked with me after lunch in his house in Rahavia. We walked around, and he said, listen, the Knesset was founded by Polish Jews, and they took what they knew from Poland and made it, even the statue of the Knesset was taken from the statue of Polish diet. And it made it, and it's a mess. There was a mess in Poland, there is a mess in Israel. Thankfully, the law we took from the British, and it works. And I would say the law in Israel is an example to us all, because I don't know very many countries in the world which can put in jail a president of the country and a prime minister of the country. I mean, who resigned from the prime ministership before he was jailed, but still he was. So that is, and that shows the tripartite division of power, which we have a problem with now in Poland. And I always give my colleagues in Parliament Israel as an example of how it should be done.
Thank you very much.